Introduction and disclaimer. This video shows all devices in a non-production environment. The devices, in most cases, are off or are fully unplugged from any external power source in order to clearly show the removal and replacement procedures and other aspects of the devices. The instructions in this video are current as of September 2014. Please consult the product manuals for the latest updates and instructions. Before watching this video, you should have already watched the caveats, disclaimers, and warnings video for required information. Before performing any maintenance, you will need to locate and identify the unit with the failed component. If necessary, have the customer take you to the unit with the failed component. If the work order provides an appliance serial number, verify that the serial number on the work order matches the serial number on the appliance. The serial number is an SYM number that is printed on a label located on the vertical post in the middle of the rear panel of the appliance. All Symantec storage shelves are shipped with a protective bezel that should be installed on the front of the devices. These bezels help channel air into the devices and provide some protection from accidental damage. The Symantec storage shelf bezels also provide a certain level of intrusion detection by employing a keyed access. The key will restrict access to those individuals that possess the correct key used to unlock and remove the bezel. To remove the bezel, insert the storage shelf key into the lock and rotate the key to right or to the left, depending on the condition of the lock, to release the bezel locking mechanism. You should be able to pull the right-hand side of the bezel out and away from the front of the storage shelf. Place the bezel off to the side and out of the way. Now that the bezel has been removed, you can confirm the chassis number of the storage shelf with the number on the work order, if noted there. On a NetBackup 5330 primary storage shelf or an expansion storage shelf, the chassis number is located on a label on the front lower right corner of the shelf. Once it has been determined that a storage shelf rail system is faulty, it must be replaced before the rail system fails completely, causing physical damage to the storage shelf. The storage shelf rail replacement process is a very long and involved process that requires the complete removal of the affected storage shelf, which in turn requires the complete shutdown of the system and all attached devices. Work with Symantec technical support and the customer to ensure the following actions are taken prior to replacing a storage shelf rail kit. Stop all NetBackup activity and power the 5330 appliance off. Before starting the storage shelf rail replacement procedure, confirm that power has been removed from the devices that you will be working on. Power is removed from the primary storage shelf if the rails to be replaced are located in the primary storage shelf or the expansion storage shelf. With the primary storage shelf powered down, power is removed from the expansion storage shelf if the rails to be replaced are located on the expansion storage shelf. Mark and label the following cables and their connection locations on the rear of the storage shelf with the rails that are to be replaced. All SAS cables and their connections and locations. Each fiber host connection and location. If a mechanical lift is available, you can eliminate the need to remove the disk drives from the storage shelf drawers by sliding the entire storage shelf, intact, out of the rack and onto the mechanical lift. The removal of the storage shelf can only be accomplished after powering down the environment and labeling all of the attached cables before removing them. If a mechanical lift is not available, the environment must be powered down and all of the cables connected to the affected storage shelf must be labeled before being removed from the device. Then all 60 of the disk drives residing in the 5 drawers must be removed in order to reduce the weight of the chassis before it can be safely moved. Starting with the bottom drawer, drawer number 5, and pull both orange release levers located in the front of the drawer out and towards the outside of the storage shelf. The release levers are located at both ends of the drawer on the bottom. Pull the drawer out to the full extension. Label each of the disk drives in their current position in the drawer using temporary labels. Do not write directly on the drives. The correct positions of the disk drives are shown here. Label the disks using a drawer number, disk location number scheme. For drawer number 5, the disks should be labeled 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, and so on. Even with all of the disk drives removed from the storage shelf, A minimum of 2 people are required in order to remove the storage shelf from the rack where the shelf is installed. Symantec recommends that 3 people lift the storage shelf out of the faulty rails. Once the storage shelf has been prepared for removal from the rack, remove the 4 screws securing the front of the storage shelf to the rack and slide the storage shelf out far enough to install the front moving handles onto the shelf chassis. Now attach the 4 metal handles to the sides of the storage shelf by pushing the top tabs on the handles into the slots on the shelf. Angle the handles and insert the bottom tabs. Push the entire handle towards the side of the shelf and then pull the handles up to secure them in place. Slowly continue sliding the storage shelf out of the rack until you can install the rear handles on the shelf and completely remove the storage shelf from the rack, placing it in a safe area close to the rack. Remove the faulty storage shelf rails from the rack, marking the location of the rails if required, so that the replacement rails can be installed in the same location. Using a Phillips screwdriver, remove the 4 screws and spacers from the front of the rail and the 2 screws and spacers from the rear of the rails. With the rails removed from the rack, inspect the rack for any damage before attempting to install the new storage shelf rails in the same location of the rack. Note: this installation procedure can be used for either storage shelf. Symantec recommends that 2 people install the rails, 1 person at the back of the rack and 1 at the front. Locate, unpack, and remove all shipping materials from the new left and right rails and installation hardware. Using a Phillips screwdriver, remove the 4 screws from the front of each of the new rails and the 2 screws from the rear of each of the rails and set the screws aside. Identify the front, taller end of each rail. Note the ledge that is perpendicular to the main part of the rail. The storage shelf sits on this ledge. Locate the spacers and place them near the rail screws. There are 2 types of spacers that can ship with storage shelves. Some spacers are round while other spacers are square. Both types of spacers are galvanized steel and both types of spacers have the same use and functionality. Which spacer you use will depend on the type of rack you have. Align the rail with the front and rear rack units, or RUs. First, locate the RUs on the front and the rear of the rack that you will use. The rear of the rails will use the 2 lower RUs for installation, while the front of the rails will use 3 RUs. Use a flathead screwdriver to loosen the inside screw of the rail, allowing the rail to expand or contract. Extend the rail so that it fits inside the front and rear rack posts. Insert the guide pin on the rear of the rail into the center hole of the lowest rear RU that you plan to use. Use the flathead screws on the sides of the rail to extend or shorten it to fit into the rack. To secure the rail to the rack, first place a spacer, 1 each, round or square depending on your rack, on 2 screws. Position the rail behind the rack holes. On the front of the rack, install 1 spacer and 1 screw in the lowest hole in the rack. Then install another spacer and a screw in the middle of the 3rd RU in the rack. The 2 remaining screws are used later to attach the shelf to the rack. On the rear of the rack, install a spacer and a screw in the rack holes above and below the guide pin. Be sure to tighten the flathead screws on the inside of the rail. The rail should fit snugly without any room for movement. Repeat the previous steps to install the right-hand rail. With the rails securely installed in the rack, it's time to reinstall the storage shelf. With 1 person on each side and 1 person in front, carefully lift the storage shelf and place the rear of the shelf into the rear of the extended rails. Slide the shelf partially into the rack and remove the 2 rear metal handles. Lift the front of the storage shelf up slightly, then slide it completely into the rack until it engages securely. Remove the 2 front metal handles. Once the storage shelf has been installed in the rack, install the 4 screws securing the front of the storage shelf to the rack. Now install the labeled disk drives into the 5 drawers on the storage shelf. The disk drive installation procedure is the same for both storage shelf units. Each storage shelf has 5 disk drawers, and each drawer holds 12 disks. All 60 disk drives must be returned to their original positions in the drawers. To help reduce the installation time, Symantec recommends that 2 people perform the disk installation. One person should unwrap the disk drive and lift the handle, then hand it to the other person and install it in the drawer. Warning: if disk drives are not installed correctly when power is turned on later, errors are shown in the hardware monitoring systems and data loss may occur. To install the disk drives into a storage shelf, start with the bottom drawer, drawer number 5. Use your thumbs to pull out the 2 orange latches towards the sides of the rack, and then grasp the latches and pull out the drawer. The front of the drawer identifies the disk drive space numbering inside the drawer. The numbering is the same for all drawers. Take the disk drive for drawer 5, location 1, and remove it from its ESD protection. To install the disk, pull up the disk latch and use it as a handle to install the disk into disk space number 1 of the drawer by inserting the disk straight down into the slot. Align the 2 raised buttons on each side of the disk with matching gaps in the slot. Make sure that the bottom of the disk is seated completely. Push down slightly and start to pull the disk latch towards you. This action moves the disk backwards. The connector on the right rear of the disks fits into the pins in the rear of the slot. Continue pulling the latch all the way down until it snaps in place under the orange tab in the front. Repeat this step for the remaining disk spaces in drawer 5. After all 12 disks are installed, check the temporary labels on each of the disks to ensure that the disks are correctly placed in the storage shelf drawer. If the disks are in the correct position, remove the temporary labels that you placed on each disk and push the drawer back into the shelf until the orange latches secure the drawer. Repeat the process for the remaining drawers, working from the bottom of the storage shelf to the top. This would be drawer 4, 3, 2, and then 1. If you replaced a set of storage shelf rails for the primary storage shelf, you will have to reconnect the fiber cables and/or SAS cables and the power cables, removing all of the temporary labels as you make each connection. First, reconnect the fiber cables that attach the primary storage shelf to the 5330 compute node, and then remove the temporary labels from the cables. Then, connect the SAS cables that connect the primary storage shelf to the expansion storage shelf and remove the temporary labels. If you replaced an expansion storage shelf set of rails, reconnect the SAS cables from the primary storage shelf to the expansion storage shelf and remove the temporary labels. Be sure that the power switch on the power canister is turned off. Plug in the power cords. Make sure that the power connector fits snugly into the canister receptacle. Attach the plastic strain relief to the power cord. Be sure that the other end of the power cord is attached to a 220 power source. Use the power switch on the new canister to turn it on. Power up the expansion storage shelf and, after a few minutes, verify that all drive present LED indicators on the front of the enclosure show that the drives are powered up and present. Verify that no amber service action required LEDs or blue service action ready LEDs are illuminated on the expansion storage shelf. If everything looks correct on the expansion storage shelf, power up the primary storage shelf enclosure. Verify that all drive present green LEDs are illuminated on each drawer of the primary storage shelf. Observe the LEDs on the 7-segment display on the primary storage shelf until the number 99 is displayed. For the expansion storage shelf, the display will show 00. It will take approximately 30 seconds to 1 minute for the expansion canister to complete its initialization. It will take approximately 3 to 5 minutes for the RAID canister to complete its initialization. Locate the storage shelf bezel that was removed. Insert the bezel key and rotate the key either to the right or to the left so that the metal locking tab is positioned vertically. The storage shelf bezel is notched on the left-hand side. This notch is inserted into a metal tab on the left-hand front side of the storage shelf chassis. Once the bezel is inserted into the notch on the chassis, the bezel can be moved into position against the front of the storage shelf and locked into place. You may have to press against the front of the bezel firmly in order to compress the RFI shielding while rotating the key in order to lock the bezel into position. Once you have the bezel in place, check to confirm that you can see the storage shelf status lights through the storage shelf indicator windows on the lower left-hand side of the storage shelf bezel. If the bezel is not aligned correctly, remove and refit the bezel until the indicators clearly show the status of the storage shelf. Remember to return the bezel keys to the customer if you obtain the bezel keys from them. Now that you have completed the replacement of the component, contact the customer and confirm that they are satisfied with the repair. After completing the hardware replacement procedures, Symantec recommends that you do the following. Remove all boxes and shipping containers from the installation area. Recycle materials as much as possible, and return any equipment or tools as needed.